I was skipping to school. My parents finally paid me my allowance. After all of the weeks I worked at my uncle's shop, they finally came up with the money they owed me. My uncle owns a pawn shop. I don't actually work there. I just clean and organize. I love to organize, not that I'm obsessive over it. I wouldn't just see something that is unorganized and fix it up. I never get bored of cleaning. I don't actually work there because I'm 12. I have cleaned up that place since I was 7. My uncle is a nice person when you don't argue with him. He will just come up with the greatest arguments that no one will question. The greatest reasoning. He always seems to be on the right side. I have been saving my money for a journal. I need one to write out all of my disturbing thoughts and to draw. I am not going to buy a sketchbook. 1, I don't draw often. 2, I like the lines to adjust the drawing easier. When I arrived at school, I talked to Penelope, a friend of mine. She was a great friend. She laughed that it took this long to get my allowance. I agreed and laughed even harder. We laughed so hard, we annoyed the other students, and we even missed the bell. Don't worry, we weren't late, it was just 5th grade. At the playground, Weasel teased me for wanting a journal. He has been doing this since he found out that I wanted one last year. He used to be my friend until he stole my dad's medication. At least I don't have a diary like you. I usually say to him as a comeback, until he gets old with it sometimes. We both laugh at each other, never really insulting each other, just making the teachers mad. At least I don't think he is insulted. Penelope would just look at me ashamed for even trying. During math, I talked to my neighbors. The story went along these lines. A boy, half my age, who was accused of murdering his mother by ripping out her heart. After he was sent to counseling, the heart was found in his stomach, not even digested. Some doctors surgically removed the heart from his body. The boy had always claimed that he didn't kill his mother, yet no one else was around according to the boy. The psychologists believed he might be lying to protect himself. His father was already dead by this point in his life, and the boy threw temper tantrums at his mother. Suddenly, weeks after the boy had stayed at the facility, a creepy man in a gas mask tore out his eyes. Before I could finish this story in my head and to my neighbors, who had faces that looked like a mix of confused and horror on, the teacher overheard and sent me to the office. I am used to this after school. I walked to the pawn shop with Penelope, explaining the story to her, as well as what new punishment the office gave me. It was the usual suspension. Penelope was annoyed that I was suspended again for telling a story like that. I don't even believe that these stories are that disturbing, just gross though. After I get my journal, I won't need to tell anyone about these stories anymore. Besides, people hate me anyway for my voice. It isn't scratchy, just fast, but low-pitched for my age. When we got to the pawn shop, my uncle hugged us both. He expected me to put things away as usual. I didn't have much to organize today, though I still hurried while still doing my best. My uncle congratulated me for getting it done before customers came in. He always did this, but I know he turns the closed-open sign around all the time. He expected us to leave until 9, but we stayed so I could buy a journal. He made a remark that my parents took so long to give the allowance, also questioning me why I wanted to buy a journal from here. I told him not to be wasteful, but I really did it to give him a higher profit. I looked through the journals. Some had pages torn out, some were badly beaten, and a few were intact. I chose a decent one with a few pages torn out. I had just the right amount of money. I left to a park bench with Penelope. I was deciding what to write in the journal. Penelope suggested the one I told in the middle of math. I laughed, but started writing that in anyway. Writing stories was much harder than I had imagined. I kept arguing with Penelope what to add, what to make clearer, and what to change. I was halfway through the story when Penelope left to chase the ding-ding man. I thanked her for getting ice cream for me. When I flipped the page, I noticed the other side wasn't blank. I hadn't written it. I knew I had searched through the journal to find any pages like this. Confused, yet I still read it. At the top of the page was the very date and time it was now. I read through it. It was talking about my uncle at his pawn shop. It described that some criminals came in, searching through his shop for something. He demanded them to leave. The criminals seemed to get more and more aggressive with searching for whatever they were looking for. My uncle tried to call the police. The men twisted both of his arms. He screamed. They shoved a sock down his throat. My uncle had suffocated. When Penelope came back with the ice cream, she wondered why I was horrified. I showed her the page. She laughed, and though I wrote it, I yelled at her for thinking I would ever write something that demented about my uncle. She said she was sorry. I searched through the journal for more pages like this. None. I ate my cone to calm down, confused by this coincidence. Penelope suggested that my uncle could have planned this. He is smart enough to. Just this morning, my parents gave me my full allowance they owe me. My uncle knew I wanted a journal. He would probably be able to know the one I would pick. Unless he wrote in all of them, which isn't good if customers buy them. He knows how much I like disturbed stories. Yet he wouldn't ever write anything like this. I went back to writing. It was getting late, close to 9. Penelope went home. I headed to the pawn shop to do my cleaning part and to talk about the too late. The police were there blocking the entrance. I demanded to know what happened. I overheard them describing that my uncle was found with a sock stuck up his throat and twisted arms, completely dead. This definitely frightened me that the page had foreseen this to happen. I was angry that they talked about this so naturally. Not enough to do anything, yet still angry. I ran home crying. At home, my parents already knew that my uncle had died. They asked me where I was and why I wasn't at the pawn shop. I tried to explain, though we were all too upset, especially my dad, to understand each other. The next morning, my dad yelled at me for not waking up for school. I told him I was suspended. He got very angry at me, blamed my stories. He was going to throw my journal away. I tried to explain that I need to write the stories, so I won't tell them in the middle of class. Instead of listening, he tore pages out, until the one about how my uncle died. He criticized me for making fun of his brother's death. I tried to explain that I didn't write it, though he would hear none of it. My mother calmed him down enough to let me keep the journal. I ran to my room to write some more stories. I was really mad at my father for tearing out my pages, though I still got them out of the trash. My story I was writing now wasn't that great. It was a lot worse than the one about the psychotic kid. I wrote about a sensitive man who traveled the mountains on hikes who fell down one once. He was badly injured, though not hurt. People teased him for his scars, so he took his revenge by giving them more scars or just mental scars. Kids became fearful of his looks, so he decided to take his revenge through them. He took them to tops of mountains, blindfolded. If they slipped, he would try to help them, though give up quickly, remembering his vengeance. If they made it to the top safely, would take of their blindfolds to show them himself. They knew he had killed some of the adults before and ran away, but he would just let them find their own way home if they didn't want his. Of course, this mentally scarred the children for life, knowing that a scarred murderer led them to the top of a mountain. You can see how stupid that was. The next page was another page with the time and date as now. As I read it, I heard a conversation going on in the kitchen between my parents. They seemed to be doing just as the page described. Whenever I looked up to not read, they would pause. I heard my father getting very mad at my mother, beating her a few times. My father wasn't this violent. My mother cried. She was defending me. My father yelled her to be quiet. I wanted to go out there, fearing what was going to happen, but I couldn't move. The page described my father shoving a sock down her throat, though all I heard out there was my mother screaming, mumbling, and moaning in pain. When the page ended, I ran to see what had happened. My father looked at me, scared, standing by the back door. He asked me what I had done. My mother had a sock shoved down her throat, to the point that it seemed it was her mouth. Her mouth was bleeding. Her eyes were vacant. She was lying on a chair, motionless. She was dead. My father called the police and the ambulance. He explained to the police officers that I killed my mother by shoving a sock down her throat. I told them he was lying, and I had written what he did to her. Of course, I lied that I wrote the page, though who would believe that I found it? My father was confused. He claimed that he just walked in from the back. The police read it through. My dad claimed that I could have fabricated it before coming out and attacking. I proved him wrong by showing the new pages I wrote since I went into my room. In the end, the cops believed my father more than me. since they found I had a page about my uncle dying. I was arrested. I was surprised. You'd think cops would believe children more than adults. I was scared being trapped in the room for a while until they asked me the questions. They explained to me that they had my father in for questions as well. Most of their questions involved the pages. I explained that I write scary stories. I explained that I clean for my uncle, and I like to clean. I explained that I loved my mother and my uncle. Lastly, I explained how I got the journal. The way I had worded this all, I tried to sound as sane as possible, though the fact that the pages appeared when the murders were happening was hard to make sane. I was sure to be going to the nut house. They interrogated my father as well. I had no idea what the questions were. I waited in the room for hours. Eventually, they explained that I am guilty, no court case, though they also informed that they believe that I am insane, so I will be taken to a psychiatrist every weekend. Great, I heard my dad arguing with my mother, yet I am the guilty one. For the next day, I was afraid of my father, and he seemed to hate me. We dared not to talk to each other. I did go outside to explore, to get ideas, and to explain my situation with Penelope. She was more than surprised. She had read in the news about my uncle, though didn't fully understand what happened until now. She even became fearful of my father. Whenever her parents saw me with her, they would criticize and call me a psycho murderer. As for the psychiatrist, they seemed calm, much like I expected. They asked me about my stories. I said they were stupid and messed up. They would just keep asking. I explained how I have a disturbing mind and get suspended for mentioning these stories in the middle of class. They mostly asked questions until the end, where they gave a verdict of the day and waved goodbye. I still had my journal but stopped writing in it for fear of another case like these. I couldn't stop thinking about my dark thoughts, though I told the stories to the psychiatrist. I calmed down for the most part over a month. Penelope still enjoyed laughing at my tales, though I only mentioned them after school. I tried to get a better reputation in school, but the teachers still despised me, although I had won an entire day, and the students nagged at me tell another story. At lunch, when the students begged me the most, the teachers would glare at me and shake their head. I don't remember exactly what the psychiatrist was saying to get us to this topic, though they suggested I should try writing the stories again to get over the fear of the journal. I always brought the journal to the meetings, though never used it. I was fearful, though had them look through it to make sure there were no new pages written. I had ripped the other ones out as well. They checked the journal for me and handed it back. I positioned myself so they could read as I write. What I wrote was about a painter whose painting came to life and attacked him. There was a lady who adored his art, although it featured dark creatures. Many people criticized his art for being violent and psychotic. Because of his bad publicity, he was blamed for murders in his area. The girl rooted for him in court, trying to deny this. Before I finished, the psychiatrist proclaimed that this story was undeniably about me. After looking through, I agreed. I had not realized how much my stories resemble my life. I finished the page, but when I turned the page, even the psychiatrist was in shock. The psychiatrist read the page aloud, just as baffled as I was. The top showed the same time and date as what it was at that moment. The page described how when Penelope was left at her house alone, she read a comedic book drinking coffee. She heard a knock on the door. When she answered, 2 men wearing gas masks barged in. They strangled her, forced her into the chair. The psychiatrist told me to stop reading and closed the journal. They asked if I knew who Penelope was. I answered yes. They called 911 saying that there was an emergency at Penelope's address. The psychiatrist hid the journal from me. I asked if I could go. They wouldn't let me. I waited, unsure of what was going to happen to my friend. I wanted to read to find out. Though when the police called back, she was perfectly safe, alone reading her book, though we're still on patrol. I couldn't resist. I searched for the journal to finish reading the page. The psychiatrist wasn't there to command me, so why not? I found the journal under a lamp, seized it and read. Penelope was strangled and beaten by these men in gas masks. They asked her where the journal was. Since she was too out of breath to speak, she took a while to tell them I had it. They slapped her. Out of nowhere, they found a sock to shove down her throat. If that wasn't enough, they squeezed her head. The police tried to come in at this point. They threw her out the window. The page ended. The psychiatrist returned to find that I read the journal page. He took it from me. All he said was, "I'm sorry, it is true." You know what happened. After that day, I wandered back home, still carrying the book. At my house, I went to bed and fell asleep. I was in the middle of darkness, cold darkness. Although it seemed freezing, I was sweating. Although it seemed endless, I was cramped. My biggest fear. I awoke, frightened by this. I took out my journal to write what happened in my dream, but there was another page I had to read. The top was the same time and date as what it was currently. The page read that I was alone at my house. I checked, and surely it was correct. It said that I was reading my journal. That is obvious. It said I was going to be attacked. That hadn't happened yet. I heard a knock on the door. I looked out my window, though I couldn't see who it was. I held the journal in my hands, expecting all they wanted was the journal. I opened the door and no one was there. I read on. The page stated that men in gas masks were at the door ready to attack me. They appeared before I looked up. I read on. They told me they wanted the journal. I gave it to them. I believed I could just go on after this, but wouldn't leave. They stabbed me and pulled me away, saying the cliched line that I know too much. I fell unconscious, crying. I woke up noticing that the men in gas masks were interrogating me, asking me what I wrote, what I saw, and what I read. I explained, nervous. I just wondered where I was the whole time. After all of the explaining, they dunked my head in boiling water, scorching my skin. They shoved a sock down my throat as usual. I almost lost breath, but they took the sock out just in time to dunk my head in melted pewter, and then back into the boiling water. They sprayed my throat. My throat got clogged. They recommended a gas mask, but I refused, giving up on life. They pulled out my eyes. I didn't care. I don't know where else to share my story, so I've just come to the first website that pops up when you search Goatman. I don't really care where I post it. The only thing that matters is that it is posted. My name is Richard, but if you don't mind me doing so, I'd prefer to skip the pleasantries and proceed with my story. I first came to know the tale of this frightful creature around a year ago, during a school expedition that took us hiking through some desolate forests somewhere in rural England. The trip was actually completely normal and nothing disturbing happened whatsoever. But as we sat down at the campfire one night, one of the students, whose name I didn't know, suggested that we tell some scary stories around the campfire. As cliché as it sounded, we all agreed and decided to take it in turns. The student who came up with the idea stated that they would go first, as they had a pretty good story saved up for a moment such as this. They told the tale of a humanoid creature that, for the most part, possessed the body of a human, but that it had the head and legs of a goat. Naturally, it was labeled as the Goatman, and the student went on to speak of the creature and its endeavors into the awful. This story is the only one I remember from that night, with the rest of the stories all being based around the same generic plot concerning a bloodthirsty creature who was on the hunt for human flesh. Easily forgettable, to say the least. What scared me about the story of the Goatman and successfully imprinted it into my memory was that it supposedly didn't kill people, or rather it didn't kill them straight away. The Goatman could shapeshift into any creature, be that a person or an animal. It didn't even need something ritualistic such as a drop of their blood. It could just transform at will. I vividly remember the student ending his tale by reminding us once more that the Goatman preferred to mentally exhaust its prey before ending their lives in a variety of unimaginably gruesome ways. Although it would very rarely show itself in its true form, the student said, victims would typically see it take dozens of appearances throughout very short time periods. This tale was slowly but surely pushed to the back of my mind over the next couple months, with me sitting important exams and entering a transition period where many students would leave my school in order to pursue their studies elsewhere, being replaced by a more optimistic bunch who were so happy throughout their first few days at the school that it made the rest of us uncomfortable. You can relax, though. They weren't brain-eating aliens sent from another planet to destroy the human race, and their blissful mood soon vanished, being replaced with a harsher, more realistic one that suited the repetitive nature of school life. During this transitionary period, a number of people I knew left the school, with some of my close friends throwing goodbye parties, whilst other people, such as the student who first introduced me to the tale of the Goatman, practically vanishing. The story of the Goatman was forcefully reintroduced to me today during a trip I made to the National Art Gallery with a small group consisting of my two closest friends. We made our way through the various sections of the gallery over the course of a couple hours, but weird and seemingly unexplainable things would occasionally happen to the group of us. The most alarming of these things was most certainly when I witnessed firsthand my friend James exiting the room containing Van Gogh's sunflowers through a door located on the right side of the room before reappearing through the door on the opposite side of the room moments later. This feat was clearly impossible due to the way the building was laid out. But when the remaining two of us started walking towards James and questioning how he'd just done that, he quickly backed out of the door without uttering a word. We concluded this was a practical joke, but before we could exit the room after James, he shouted to us from the right-hand side of the room that he had initially exited out of. He yelled, "You guys coming or not?" and was seemingly clueless when we caught up to him and questioned him about the events that had just transpired. I was somewhat shaken by this initially, but refused to accept that it could have been anything but a practical joke. Whilst this was the only largely creepy thing that occurred within the gallery, with the only other noticeable occurrences being a few people smiling at us in creepy ways, and one woman who supposedly walked up to my friend Charlotte and began talking to her in a language Charlotte could only describe as cryptic. Things only got worse once we decided to depart. As we drove back to our town, I stared out of the window and dozed off, suddenly awaking out of nowhere as the car stood stationary at some traffic lights. Rubbing my eyes, I gazed out of the window once again, but was jolted awake when I saw the kid who had first told me the story of the Goatman all those months ago, staring at me from the other side of the road. He had an eerie grin on his face, but in true horror movie fashion, I did the stupidest thing imaginable and opened the car door before running up to him smiling back, fully prepared to catch up with him and ask where he'd been. I hadn't thought about the Goatman so far that day up until I saw the boy from the hiking trip standing there and looking back on it. I'm pretty sure that the Goatman knew this too. He wasn't willing to let me forget. Just before I made it to the other side of the road, a car came speeding out of nowhere and passed right in front of me, missing me by mere inches. I flinched and impulsively clenched my eyes shut, only opening them when I sensed the danger had passed. I almost jumped out of my skin when I focused on where the boy whose name I didn't know had been standing, only to come face to face with an elderly man who, despite his drastically changed features, wore the same creepy smile on his face. I turned and sprinted back to the car, where my three friends had observed the entire event from. I knew I couldn't have been hallucinating when I saw the looks of abject terror etched across their faces. I jumped in, closed the door behind me, and James slammed his foot down on the gas. The four of us sat in silence, with the only conservation we had occurring when James attempted to pull into his driveway, before Charlotte shouted at him to turn the car around and head towards the nearest police station. He began to question her, but she cut him off, and the desperation in her voice told us that something was very wrong. James kept his eyes on the road as he drove towards the station, and Charlotte looked out the window as she sat next to him, occasionally catching my gaze as she glanced back in my direction, a look of unwavering concern overshadowing her usually calm demeanor. We eventually reached the police station and I got out the car. We reached the door to the station before Charlotte grabbed me and twisted me around, forcing me to look back at the car. I caught a glimpse of a figure dragging its leg behind it as it shuffled off in the other direction, features indistinguishable in the cover of the night. "What?" I asked her as I observed the figure, somewhat rationally assuming it was someone departing from the police station after having been interviewed regarding an injury to their leg. "Richard," she whispered to me, voice evidently close to giving out and with tears in her eyes. "That thing, it was in the car with us. Did you somehow not notice it?" There were 3 of us in that car when we arrived at and began to leave the gallery, but a while after you got back in, I caught sight of it. It was sitting next to you in the back. I was watching it from the wing mirror of the car, and it just sat there, smiling at you for the entire journey with this horrible, indescribable smile. Her voice trailed off as she finished her sentence, and I was left more terrified than I'd ever been and ever will be in my life. There was no way I couldn't go an entire hour-long car journey without noticing somebody sitting next to me. It was impossible, and I knew it. Yet it had happened. My feet gave out from the sheer panic I was experiencing, and I collapsed to the floor with an audible thud. Now my eyes were filling up with tears too. But I swear I saw the silhouette in the distance turn around to look at me one final time before shuffling off into the night. The police heard us out, but took no action, as all we really had to talk about was a couple people smiling at us creepily and an account of somebody slipping into our car, having been noticed by the person who sat in the passenger seat in front of it, yet somehow evading the sight of James and myself, despite supposedly staring at me for the entire journey. I explained to them the story of my hiking trip and of the goatman, but it was met with raised eyebrows despite my pleading and protesting. By this point, I would have started questioning my own sanity, had I not been sitting next to 2 others who had shared this horrific experience with me. Eventually, the police said they'd come and visit each of our houses the following morning for more information after we'd had a sleep, and that we should call them if anything else out of the ordinary happened. They escorted each of us home, and we decided to reconvene the following day at James's house in order to try and piece together what had happened over the course of the day. I was the last to be dropped off, and the policeman who was driving the squad car told me that they'd keep a unit on standby throughout the night, and that it would be dispatched to my address immediately, should I dial the emergency services. He flashed me a smile as he rolled up the window of his car, and I froze momentarily before shrugging it off. I was able to muster a faint laugh as I looked at my predicament, with me now being so paranoid that I was coming within inches of a heart attack whenever somebody did so much as smile in my direction. However, my fears were very much reasonable, and maybe, just maybe, I was correct to have been scared by his smile. I dared not look back as I made the long walk up my driveway and into my house, being sure to lock and bolt the door behind me before searching the entire house for any open windows. Every window in the house was closed, but that didn't stop me from locking them too. I tried sleeping in my room with the lights on, but I found that my mind refused to rest and instead desired to wander. I came up with endless explanations, but there was one so terrifying that I was forced to get out of my bed and roam around the house, keeping any suspicious movement going on outside. Perhaps it should have been obvious to me earlier, but I'd had so much going through my head that I'd only just come to the realization that I'd never seen the boy who told me about the goatman and appeared to me on the side of the road anywhere apart from on that hiking trip. Desperate to be proven incorrect, I grabbed my yearbook and began frantically tearing out the pages. Minutes later, I was a sobbing mess, having gone through the entire yearbook, but not found a single person resembling him. Now it was clear to me. The goatman himself was the one who had told me the tale of the goatman, and the boy he was capable of shape-shifting into must have been a past victim or something along those lines, seeing as I'd never seen him in my life before or after the night where he first told us the tale. At least that was the case up until today. As I'm writing this, I'm sitting at the table in my living room. I have all the doors locked and windows bolted, with a piece of furniture propped up against each one to prevent anyone, or anything, from entering. I also have the radio on loud to drown out all of the sounds emanating from upstairs, those being the occasional creaking of the floorboards and other noises which I cannot identify. To be fair, I do live in a very old house, so perhaps those sounds are rationalizable. I have my mobile next to me, just one tap away from calling the police. It's 8 p.m. That means my parents should get home from their evening out in around 2 hours. I'll just sit tight until then, staring out of the window into my garden. Thankfully, nothing can get to my house without walking up the drive and passing through the well-lit front garden first, so I'll be able to call the police immediately if anything or anyone who I don't recognize starts approaching. My dog is lying flat on the floor a couple meters from me, staring up at me with a vacant expression. I think it can sense my fear. Nothing can get into the house without making an awful amount of noise. I know that now. I will have time to flee and call the police on my mobile before anything bad happens to me. You see, there's just one problem that I blatantly ignored during my over-analysis of the situation. My parents took our dog with them on their trip. Whatever is currently lying mere meters away from me on the kitchen floor knows it cannot possibly be my dog, and as it begins to convulse, I fear it's realized that I've just come to the same conclusion. I woke up in a hospital this morning, but I can still feel him watching. The doctors say I was found 100 miles outside of Las Vegas. They had to toss my clothes because they were drenched in blood. They tell me an officer will be in to ask me a couple of questions sometime soon, but I don't want to talk to the police. I can still feel him watching me, and if he's watching me here, then there's no place I can go to escape. I was hitchhiking, trying to get to Bakersfield. I wasn't getting any rides on the interstate, so I got off into one of those old routes. I think it was 66, but can't be sure. I had 16 bottles of water in my sack and tried to conserve them as best as I could, but after the first 4 hours, they'd gone drier than the desert I was walking on. By the time the sun had gone down, I'd walked maybe 20 or 30 miles and had passed by only 6 cars. I eventually fell down on the side of the road and watched as the utter darkness of the desert surrounded me. My mouth was dry, my skin was blazing, my thoughts clouded. That's when he pulled up, driving a black BMW. He rolled the window down and a big old cloud of smoke poured out. "Do you need assistance, my friend?" asked the man in the black BMW, to which I could barely croak a yes. He crawled out of the car, his limbs awkwardly jerking in either direction as he did. He was tall, my God was he tall. I stand 6'3" and he somehow managed to tower over me. Despite the utter blackness of the desert, his eyes were covered by dark shades. "Where are you going?" he asked me, his voice thick with some accent I didn't recognize. He offered me a lanky hand and helped me off my feet. "California." I barely muttered as I gained my balance. "Long way. Where is your car?" I debated over telling him my car had broken down the road and blown a tire or something, but instead told him don't have one. Trying to get home, lost all my money in Vegas. He simply smiled and cracked open the passenger side door before drifting back towards the driver's seat. Something didn't feel right. Something about him was off. But I was in the middle of the desert. It was getting cold, and he was the only car I'd seen in a couple of hours. As soon as we started driving, a single question popped into my head. How had he seen me? I knew it was pitch black outside, but driving at any speed, he should have sped off right past me. But he didn't. He pulled up right beside me. "Did you enjoy Vegas, my friend?" he asked, tilting his head slightly towards me as he spoke. "I cannot stand the place, personally. It is a very disturbing city. Vegas was okay, I guess. Lost all my money, so not the best vacation." He nodded again and was silent for a long time. My eyes wandered around his car. It was spotless except for a small dark stain on the driver's side dash. Granted, the only reason the stain was visible was the contrast between the dash's lights. I noticed another strange thing about the driver. At first I thought it was the fact that he was wearing all black, and that my mind was shot from the heat, but the skin that clung loosely, very loosely, to the man's frame appeared to be glowing white. Not the horrible bright white light of an fluorescent light bulb, but the dim dull light of a HD TV left on, tuned into nothing. Just then my eyes caught the speedometer. The BMW was redlining. We were going at a speed of 125 miles down this road. "I need to make a quick stop, my friend." I couldn't agree, as he was the driver. He pulled off to the side of the road, down a dirt path and out into the desert, the speedometer still redlined. I watched out the window as surface faded into and out of existence between the headlight beams. I nearly slammed my head into the dash when he stopped on a dime. He flung open his door and set out into the desert, leaving me there, alone in the midst of nothingness for what felt like an eternity. I flicked on the cabin lights and investigated the car further. It was almost completely spotless, save for 2 or 3 more stains that marked the back seat and the center console. I opened the center console to find it empty. I checked the glove box. The driver's manual was still wrapped in the plastic bag, but otherwise the glove box was empty. After several moments of sitting there, I decided to pop the trunk. I crawled out of the BMW. The heat of the day was completely gone now. I shivered as I walked towards the trunk. I could tell that the trunk wasn't empty. A big black bag sat within. Some part of my brain screamed to leave the bag, screamed to get back to the highway and get away from this man and his car. But of course, I didn't. It can't be that bad. It's never really that bad, is it? You always read about the stories of serial killers or some scary ghost story, but none of them are ever true. They always happen to a friend of a friend of a friend. They never actually happen to anybody you know. So I reached my hand out to touch the bag, to fumble around for a zipper, to open the bag and see what this man could possibly have inside of his trunk. And it jerked. Something inside the bag jerked towards me, accompanied by the tortured scream of something clearly not human. It screeched and screeched. Whatever limb it possessed thrust at the bag over and over again. My heart stopped. My brain began screaming for my legs to move away from the bag, but my legs had some other idea, as did my hands. I found myself clawing at the bag, tears pouring down my cheeks. I found myself ripping at the fabric of this bag. The inhuman scream deafened me more and more with each second. When my nails finally scraped a hole inside of the fabric, my eyes peered upon some black oasis of fear from within the hole. A shining black oasis that could only be the eye of whatever creature lay within in bag. And that's when I found myself flung away from the trunk, the hatch being slammed shut, and the return of the glowing driver. He clutched in his hand a writhing mass of bleeding human. He'd removed his shades, and I now peered upon a shining black oasis of rage. His form took on a less human-looking one. His nostrils flared, but not outwards. They seemed to recede into his skull. He was bearing row after row of shark-looking teeth, and he moved towards me with the speed of a bullet. His hands, no, not hands, claws, found their way to my neck. His fingertips, like talons, dug into my neck. I could feel the warm drip of my own blood pouring down my skin and drenching my shirt. His mouth moved as though speaking, but I was still deafened by the trunk thing. His eyes shimmered at me. Light seemed to flush out of his and into mine. His look sent my whole body into panic. My heart began to pound faster and faster. I squirmed at his grasp and kicked at his literal rock-hard body. My God, I can still feel those eyes. The last thing I can remember was the movement of his lips. He's coming back for me, I know it. I can't talk to this officer. I need out of this place now. I need to get out. The sun is setting outside. I know he's coming for me now.